Good morning to Paula and other guests from far, far west, and good afternoon to Gertrude and other guests from Germany. I would like to welcome you all for the webinar today, which is part of our centenary celebrations. The topic today is about us, the women today. And we are all aware of the turbulent times that we are in since last year, as we were talking to the guests just before the meeting. Just, the COVID and the lockdowns, the war in some countries, the political unrest, and even the natural calamities that we are facing here, like cyclones, one after another, and even sometimes simultaneously. It has tested our strength again and again and left us grappling with fear and uncertainty. It's been a harsh truth that in crises like these, women always and everywhere are hit harder. Whether the crisis is in family or in social political situations, women usually bears the brunt of it. Today, we'll hear more about it from Dr. Paula Ellman and Dr. Jhuma Basak, at how women are evolving in these times and what more needs to be done. Dr. Gertraud Schlesinger Kipp has consented to chair the webinar. Thank you, Gertrude. She's a psychologist, psychoanalyst, and a training analyst of the German Psychoanalytical Association. She was president of the Alexander Mitscherlich Institute in Kassel and president of DPV. In the IPA, she was a member of the board. She founded the German part of the Committee on Women and Psychoanalysis in 2002 and was also overall chair of COVAP. Her main interest is the support of women through psychoanalysis, especially in emerging IPA areas like China, India, Georgia, etc. Now she is active in the Committee Migration and Refugees of the IPA. She has authored numerous publications on female development in life cycle, childhood in World War II, and psychotherapeutic approaches with refugees. Now I pass on to Gertrude and she will open it and then she will begin the webinar. Over to you, Gertrude.
Thank you, Bati, very much for your invitation and for all your work and for this nice introduction. And welcome all of you, colleagues in India and all over the world, dear Jhuma and dear Paula. To be invited here to chair this webinar, I feel very honored because I was 2 times in 2018 and 19 at the COVAP conferences in Kolkata, as you know, and now in the pandemic where we cannot make a journey, we cannot travel. It seems in the afterwardsness a great gift for me to be there. The book, the COVAP book of psychoanalytic and sociocultural perspectives on women in India, where the many chapters of the first conference are in, is to be released shortly. Several times I was in India, but the 2 visits in Kolkata let me dive into the spirit of India. I had, as I also told in the inauguration, I had much time to walk through the city because I was there 10 days and I walked alone or with colleagues. And as Jhuma said, the historical chaos of the streets of the city have been its strange sense of order for its people. And this was what I could feel walking to the streets to find inner order in the temples, in the museums, in the people. And this is very hard to transport to my home country because people don't believe it, just as they also don't know much about the history of the Indian Psychoanalytic Society, which is the oldest international society. And it's very important to bring this into the IPA all over and over again. And I learned to know also how you are so well connected with clinics and universities and hospitals and humanitarian organizations. And as chair of the Migration and Refugee Committee in the IPA Committee on Humanitarian Field, I can worship this very much, this work, what I learned to know in Kolkata, where young people, doctors and nurses and psychoanalysts in the first line are working in the community. In the last Zoom conference we had just over 1 year ago, in the beginning of the pandemic, I really felt comforted by the young people, how they spoke about their experiences in the pandemic, their losses, their you can see another coping with life and death and illness and loss of loved ones in your country than in our countries. But now, 1 year later, everything is unimaginably worse. But on the other hand, I read an article from a German female journalist who said that in the Western journals, you only hear about the terrible things happening in India and not about all these helpful things that also are happening by tough volunteers, by doctors and nurses, and by projects of psychoanalysts in the communities, and the power of women in their homes. So I think this is a very important aspect for COVAP, for the IPA COVAP, to listen to what you have to tell us from India. Now who is the first speaker today? She's a training and supervising analyst and serves as teaching faculty in the Contemporary Freudian Society in Washington, DC, and the Washington-Baltimore Center for Psychoanalysis. She's the overall chair of the IPA Committee on Women and Psychoanalysis and the chair of the IPA Intercommittee Work Group on Prejudice and Racism. Recently elected to represent North America in the IPA board, she's on the editorial board of the International Journal of Psychoanalysis and board member of the North American Confederation, the NAPSAC. I met her also at the COVAP conference in Wuhan, because she is since long working there in the Wuhan Hospital for Psychotherapy in training for young analysts. And she has written a lot of publications about female psychology, enactment, and terror. And she is with Jhuma Basak and myself. We give out this book I just mentioned. So, dear Paula, I give you the word to Washington, DC.
Thank you so much, Gertraud. And I do want to say it's a complete honor to be invited to speak on the occasion of the India Society Centenary. Certainly a very important accomplishment that all the rest of our societies have to aspire to. I do want to again echo what Gertraud said about a book that she and Jhuma and I have worked hard to edit, to contribute to and edit, that will be coming out within the next 6 months, we expect, perhaps sooner. And its title is Psychoanalytic and Sociocultural Perspectives on Women in India. And I am coming to the end of my term as overall chair of COOP, passing the lead to Patricia Alcalombra from Buenos Aires, who's with us today, which is my delight to see her step into doing this important work. And I've also so much appreciated working with Jhuma on developing a very strong presence of COOP in India. And one of the one thing that I do want to inform you about, and we have an Indian contributor on our new co-op series editorial board. And I am not able to pronounce her last name. If you could help me, Jhuma, Amrita, what is her last name? You're muted, I'm sorry. Thank you. And Amrita is one of the 6 contributors to our new co-op editorial board on our book series, and we are strongly encouraging submissions of book proposals on topics related to women and gender. Can be about masculinity, can be about fluid gender, transgender. We are very, and by solo authors too. We really want to encourage the voice of people who can begin to think about writing in these topics. So, and we would provide support with you along the way of developing your book ideas. So please keep in mind that we have this newly appointed editorial board that has global representation from all co-op, from all IPA regions. So do keep that in mind for yourself and your colleagues, please. So while we are in the midst of, well, certainly India is in the midst of a horrendous time that the world has been grappling with, our focus today, Jhuma and I, are going to focus less on the pandemic and more on women. And I think there's some coincidental, perhaps not so much coincidental overlap in our papers, which I think is very interesting. But I think the issues we are speaking about related to women certainly have a strong presence in the struggles we are all grappling with in all regions, very much in India right now with the pandemic. So I'm going to be, the title of my paper is Self-Agency in the Feminine, What Females Need Today. So today I consider this specific question of agency, both developmentally and clinically. Based on some clinical experiences, I want to consider what is agency, what is will for the woman, and how do we understand it? I bring into my discussion aspects of psychoanalytic theory about self-agency, and I also describe what stands out in my clinical work with vignettes of my work with 2 female adolescents and a middle-aged woman, and in greater clinical depth with the mother of 2 young women. I also do wonder about how social media may enter into a discussion on agency. I mean, is it agency when young women post Instagram selfies, when they have 500 plus followers, capturing their mirrored reflections of their bodies in their new clothes or bathing suits, or putting on displays of their fun social times with their friends? How might the use of social media contribute to the development of agency? Is it a mechanism by which young women are internally working on their sense of agency? If I have time, we are limited on time. I will also consider some current usage of social media related to how it relates to self-agency. I intend this paper to clarify the place of self-agency in females and also address times when problematic conflicts and experiences serve to compromise the fluid development of agency in the woman. Recently, a male patient described to me an experience with his wife. She consistently finds fault with him, and he's troubled by her ongoing complaints of people that are closest to her. And then I hear from him that she asks him for his direction in simple decisions that could not be more obvious. For instance, should she loan her ski socks to her son's girlfriend on their family ski trip? I wonder, might her highly critical self and her profound self-doubt both be related to a problem with a stable sense of self-agency? In our journals, recent contributions focus on efforts to understand the nature of self-agency. In 2018, Sugarman writes about agency in terms of self-responsibility and discusses a case where he emphasizes an entitlement that includes an effort to avert a too severe superego. He presents a case of a young woman who disavows self-responsibility. She shows no awareness of the self as an agent in her creation and perpetuation of her difficulties. The patient had a procrastination difficulty and was laissez-faire about this problem, often resorting to using manipulation to make her way through her life. Sugarman theorizes that narcissistic traits and superego difficulties account for this particular version of self-agency difficulties. He references Tyson and Lowald as offering perspectives on this topic, where their emphases are on the absence or presence of a neurotic structure. Lowald emphasizes self-responsibility as an essential structural attainment that helps to define neurosis. Quote, this sense of mastery only occurs if an individual has a superego capable of self-responsibility. Responsibility to oneself within the context of authoritative norms, consciously and unconsciously accepted or assimilated from parental and societal sources, is the essence of the superego as internal agency. Self-responsibility involves appropriating or owning up to one's needs and impulses as one's own. Such appropriation means to experience ourself as agents, end quote. Cohen also notes the relationship between the superego and a sense of self as agent, or its lack thereof. He finds that patients with an excess of entitlement avoid responsibility and self-agency to ward off the self-criticisms of their harsh superego. It's impossible to experience agency if one does not experience one's internal world. With the capacity for choice comes greater ownership of responsibility. I want to broaden this discussion of agency beyond the concept of the sense of self-responsibility related to the importance of the nature of the superego, with its focus on the neurotic versus narcissistic question. I want to consider agency in terms of something more primary, more related to psychic structure, more a way of grounding in selfhood, direction, purpose, identity. Agency accompanies aspects of sexual and gender identity. Agency today is not just accepting the assignment of gender, but choosing it. Psychoanalysis grants the awareness of unconscious fantasy affecting facets of the mind structure, thereby freeing up the motivation and capacity to make choices and strengthening the establishment of agency. The nature of the unconscious fantasy may contribute to the state of agency and the experiences of the self. A column in the New Yorker entitled "A Year Without a Name" by Cyrus Grace Dunham captures this in his poignant personal history narrative. He writes, 20 years ago, my girlhood was dissolving with no clear alternative in place. I felt less embodied than ever. My unease was far-reaching. I felt like vapor trapped in a container, a windowless room with no doors, a single dangling light that never turned off. I was dysphoric. I'd have to decide whether to do something about it. And later, I am him now. I need to be him now. I choose to move towards something like manhood. This piece impressed me as one in which the author demonstrates his process of claiming agency, the agency to desire and to choose. Establishing agency in the female was discussed in a panel entitled Issues of Power and Aggression in 2003, where Ethel Person argues that issues of self-agency, assertiveness, self-determination, and regulation of interpersonal relationships arise from what she termed a power motive. This is inborn, she writes, though distinct from the drives of classical theory. She traces the development of the power motive from its biological roots to its shaping by interpersonal and cultural contexts. Power was viewed not as a primarily destructive, but as an essential and universal aspect of human nature. Although the infant is helpless at birth, Person notes, there are early signs within the first days of life of self-assertion. Through interactions with parents and caretakers, the child continues to develop methods of personal and interpersonal power. If this development goes awry, destructive aggression may result either from the frustration of the power motive or from an experience of narcissistic injury. Person continues stating that a sense of personal power is no less important than a sense of interpersonal power. In fact, personal power is generally a prerequisite to stable interpersonal relationships. By personal power, she is referring to the capacity to define ourselves and our needs in a world that seems bent on defining us and shaping us to respond to its demands. Gradually, the child develops an awareness of the intention to assert oneself. Quoting Person, to wield personal power, we must possess some ability to write our own life stories, to choose the direction our lives take, to control our time and the uses to which we put our minds and bodies. End quote. Person describes the impact of cultural values on the acquisition of power and the frequency of the woman's inhibition of self-assertion, self-determination, and capacity for regulating interpersonal relationships. Chodorow links the elements of establishing gender identity with creating the internal space relevant to agency. Quoting Chodorow, each woman creates her own psychological gender through emotionally and conflictually charged unconscious fantasies that help construct our inner world, that projectively imbue cultural conceptions, and that interpret her sexual anatomy, end quote. Chodorow addresses that for most people, unconscious fantasies seem an important primary ingredient in personal gender, where each woman creates her own prevalent animation of gender by attributing varying importance to factors of self, object, and body. Through psychoanalysis, with its work on unconscious fantasy, gender and self becomes organized around dominant or subordinate fantasies, and by freeing up the capacity for choice, strengthens the establishment of agency. I now move to the clinical material, hoping to bring more life to these concepts. I'm working with two adolescent females, one 14 years old and one 18 years old, in the midst of their development. The 14-year-old has a brother who excels at everything in his life, his academics, friendships, athletics. My patient, his twin sister, opts out of engagement with school and friendships. She struggles with suicidal ideation. She and her father have a tremendously conflict-filled way of relating, and she professes to me her hatred for him. She presents with a masculine way of moving and is strongly identified with her athleticism. She's a star team player, yet remains remote from her team peers. Her athletic excellence brings her pleasure and a sense of power. She reports her distress with the horrible, hateful exchanges she has with her father, and she wishes him dead. My 18-year-old patient had previously been ridden with panic attacks, fear of disease, fear of flying, fear of disaster, earthquakes, destruction. All had been horribly disabling for her. She too has a tumultuous relationship with her remote academic father. Developing herself as a writer is her life passion, and she's pursuing writing in college. She takes pleasure and comfort in finding her voice through writing creatively. These young females both are in the midst of an internal battle to establish their sense of self-agency. Both have especially close relationships with their mothers, at times enmeshed, and conflict-embroiled relationships with their fathers. Both fathers are isolative and emotionally labile, often rageful, and who cannot seem to engage their daughters in nurturing relationships, nor provide the possibility for a triadic world. Here I want us to think about the function of the father, and I put that in quotes. I find quite helpful Berkstead-Brain's concept of the penis as link, a function which I think may be foundational to the smooth establishment of agency for the woman. The penis's link is about the triadic and Oedipal and object relations and an intercourse within one's mind and between analyst and analysand. I quote Berkstead-Brain, as opposed to the binary aspect of the phallic vision along the lines of presence and absence, the structuring and linking function of the penis, of the tripartite world of the mother, linked with but different from the father and child in relation to the parents, makes for a more complex world. In this position, good and bad, powerful and powerless, masculine and feminine are encompassed rather than being mutually exclusive. The penis's link functions just as the Oedipal couple functions to connect and create. The resolution of the Oedipal complex, the movement into the depressive position, the possibility of the creation of the triangular space, the third, creates a place of equivalency where the other is seen in like terms, where perspective shifts. The use of the word link is crucial in recognizing the bond that becomes possible when the constellation of fantasies about penis include relationships and love. Where there may be fantasies about the phallus and distinctively about penis as link, their content in relation to sexual excitement and to the other are quite different in their aim. Quoting again from Berkstead-Brain, while the phallus belongs to the mental configuration that allows only for the all or nothing distinction, hence to the domain of omnipotence, and is an attempt away from triangulation, the penis's link, which links mother and father, underpins Oedipal and bisexual mental functioning, and hence has a structuring role which underpins the process of thinking, end quote. This new modality is the symbolic world of the mind, or the formation of a triangular space, as Ron Britton put it. The new modality, Britton addresses the importance of the Oedipal space in the establishment of the sense of what I think of as self-agency. He writes, the acknowledgement by the child of the parents' relationship with each other unites his psychic world, limiting it to one world shared with his two parents in which different object relationships can exist. The closure of the Oedipal triangle by the recognition of the link joining the parents provides a limiting boundary for the internal world. It creates what I call a triangular space, a space bound by the three persons of the Oedipal situation and all their potential relationships. It includes the possibility of being a participant in a relationship and observed by a third person, as well as being an observer of a relationship between two people. Britton continues, to clarify this point, it's helpful to remember that observed and imagined events take place in a world conceived of as continuous in space and time. He references Ray, 1979, who writes, giving structure by the Oedipal configuration, the capacity to envision a benign parental relationship influences the development of a space outside the self, capable of being observed and thought about, which provides the basis for a belief in a secure and stable world. While the limits of the maternal container challenge the Oedipal, the father function, not functioning as a third, interferes with the development of the capacity to integrate observing and experiencing. It is only with the possibility for integrating, observing, and experiencing, and the development of mentalization that create thought becomes possible. In the context of the treatment, the penis's link, the triangular space, the capacity to integrate experience with observation brings contact between analyst and analysand and serves to facilitate observing and thinking in the analytic session. Let me move ahead here. These concepts shed light on ways that the structuring of the mind leads to the capacity to think and to the development of agency. How this unfolds developmentally is captured most poignantly at the time of adolescence. Gilligan writes about how girls lose their voice at adolescence and how they must gain the ability to resist cultural norms to stay connected to and further develop an authentic sense of self. Winnicott's work on object uses is also critical in understanding the adolescent developmental challenge. He points to the subject's need for the object to survive the felt aggression to be used. That is, if you can survive my anger, you can see me and I can be seen. The cultural sanctions against the direct expression of aggression and becoming a subject of desire interfere in the teenage girl's negotiating the passage of her adolescence and arriving at both connection and separation. By managing the tension of both, as she works through her passage, by being aggressively self-directed and simultaneously interested in taking care of others, she solidifies the use of thirdness within the intersubjective space. So now I turn to talk about my work with two adult female patients, both who passed through similar adolescence in relations to their mother and father. A woman in her late 50s, a married mother of 3, recently came for her first psychotherapy, and within the first 10 minutes told me that she had never told anyone this, and she broke into sobbing. When she was in her last year of college, she was engaged to a young man, quite handsome and desirable. He would come to visit her regularly when she worked at the front desk of a college facility that was infrequently used. At each visit, they would both go into a nearby closet, shut the door, and have sex. My patient expressed she knew she did not want to have sex, but believing she had no choice, she would close her eyes and collapse to the floor and play dead until her fiancé stopped. They never spoke about this. This went on for some time, and eventually and fortunately, she ended the engagement. She struggles to permit herself even a once-a-week psychotherapy, since even that feels like a shameful indulgence to her. She speaks about professional and personal relationships where she cannot help but put the other first, believing herself selfish to do otherwise. She's profoundly unhappy, bedraggled, and burdened. While the dictates of a religiously observant early life are present in her mind, I'm inclined to think about how her developing a sense of agency was somehow hijacked in the course of her development. Perhaps the hijacking was contributed to by the family's strict religious observance. Barbara, another patient, a woman in her 40s, came to consult with me because she was painfully convinced that her husband was having an affair with another woman, or that he is homosexual or having a homosexual affair. She told him about her worries, and he insisted that he's faithful to her. The couple does not engage in any sexual intimacy. The husband is passive and my patient disinterested. The absence of her husband's interest, fueled by my patient's painful mistrust, and she could not help but to speak to her husband regularly about her jealous worries. Early on in her treatment, Barbara described her husband as not being enough for her, feeling that something was wrong with him. Over the course of the past few years, Barbara's concerns have evolved to be more about herself, not feeling like she is enough, and that something is missing in her. With searing distress, this becomes her felt experience as she meets up with the challenges of parenting her 2 young children and the developmental difficulties that have arisen for them. The oldest in kindergarten shows some learning challenges with reading and mild behavioral problems, and her toddler has difficulties with language development. Barbara easily construes her child's difficulties as being due to her faulty mothering, that she lacks something essential that they need from a mother. She describes that her child's needs and demands are too much for her. She wants to be alone. She feels guilty relying on her babysitter, but she insists she needs time away from them. She describes feeling bored whenever she's with her children. Recently, she described her distressing worry that her 5-year-old is a narcissist, as evidenced by his repetitive drawings of himself as a king, positioned at the top of a fort, with his friends beneath him, fighting off enemies and protecting him. She reflected on her own early life fantasy of being a princess, while she played alone in her family's backyard. And then she reluctantly and with embarrassment admitted to me that she imagined herself in these fantasies not as a princess, but as a goddess, her own longings for a sense of power, suggesting her struggle with an experience of powerlessness. Barbara was an only child. Her parents divorced when she was 6 years old. Her contact with her seeming ineffectual father was limited to weekends. She dreaded her visits to him. Her father had a new young wife, and they both hit her to keep her out of their bedroom when she came to their closed door with frightening night terrors. Her father died of a heart attack in her adolescence. Her mother dated many men over the years with little stability in any of the romantic relationships. Her mother's current boyfriend is a man who was Barbara's elementary school teacher. Application of her makeup and styling her hair. Barbara repeatedly expresses to me her eagerness for and anticipation of her mother's visits to her and her family. Yet with each visit, she relates what has become her predictable rage at her mother for her mother's frequent undermining of her parenting and competition for her grandchildren's attention and love. Her mother never expresses any curiosity in Barbara's mind, her thoughts, or about her work. Barbara describes her mother's demands of her, her demands to appear to be her way of her entering Barbara's family as a kind of an occupying force, often usurping her daughter's place. The space between the two collapses, and Barbara's mental space also collapses. While initially thrilled with her anticipation of her mother's visits, she quickly turns resentful and furious, angrily lashing out and feeling torn between her rage and her guilt. Barbara has few friends. Friendship often carries oppressive comparisons in her mind. While at times her comparisons will bring her a sense of triumph, where she can feel superior, more often the comparisons lead to self-condemnation of inadequacy and worthlessness. So fluctuating is Barbara's sense of self, so quickly she can be thrown into states of uncertainty, anxiety, a belief in her lacking, and her missing something internal that she thinks is essential. What is missing for Barbara is her firm sense of agency. We may be accustomed to thinking of this as a narcissistic problem. Might we consider this as a problem of self-agency? I suggest that the establishment of agency in the young female is centered in aspects of the relationship to an internalized maternal and paternal object. Lachman finds that as the infant's recurrent affect states are responded to by caretakers, the infant's sense of self develops. Here he refers to the way that the infant begins to know the affect states and differentiates between those that are distressing and eventually comes to experience himself as a separate but connected being in relation to others. Affect is the primary organizer of the self-experience. Stollerow and Brandschaft suggest the idea of the way affect organizes experience in their conceptualization and study of transformation as it occurs in adult treatment. They state that as the analyst's affective responsivity furthers the patient's affect integration, the patient's sense of self develops. If the early object is excessively narcissistic, unable to hold and affirm the inner world of the child, and or the function of the third is compromised or rendered ineffectual at creating space in the maternal dyad to facilitate the developing experience of the child's inner world, the inner world becomes limited, at times collapsed, and the establishment of self-agency is compromised. The possibility that the capacity to experience ourselves as conscious, intentional agents in a coherent world of objects is not merely a modality of perception, but rather a maturational and development achievement that's vulnerable to neglect and maltreatment. So this paper, I'm going to bring us to conclusions since I've had my 30 minutes. This paper considers the instances of 2 adolescents and 2 middle-aged mothers, one with the young children and one with the grown children, and the way that the clinical work is crucial in the building of an experience of an inner life, of an internal space that can move forward, that could move forward the more fluid development of agency, of an internal grounding in selfhood. I very much look forward to our discussion together on this topic, and I thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paula, for this paper with much theoretical input and also the clinical work with what you've done. And I don't think it's overlapping, but it's very much good in the connection with Jhuma without knowing this. So thank you so much. And we will discuss it later, I heard. Bati, we continue to Jhuma's paper now.
I think so. So then after that, we can have the audiences comment, queries, whatever it is. Or if you, if Paula and you people, if you want to take it one by one, we can do that also. How would you like to do that?
I think we'll do how it's planned.
All right.
So we have
probably let's have both the papers and then we can go to the audience. Yeah.
We have much time for discussion because we have to finish exactly at 8 o'clock. So we have a lot more time. Okay, thank you. So I present you Jhuma Basak. You know her very well because she's since 20 years in the IPA active. She's a training and supervising psychoanalyst of the Indian Psychoanalytical Society and in a PhD in psychology from the Kyushu University in Japan. She's a member of the International Psychoanalytic Association and also of the Japan Association, I read somewhere. And she's the co-chair of the Asia COVAP IPA group, along with the independent U groups of the IPA, which is very important now and coming up. And she's a member of the IPA in humanitarian organizations. She pursued her interest in psychoanalysis with specific emphasis in culture, woman, and gender. She has many international publications and papers on the IPA congresses. And as we already heard, she's a co-editor of the book Psychoanalytic and Sociocultural Perspectives in Women in India. She was the mentor of the Psychoanalytic Study Group in Bangalore, and she is associated with the Ambedkar University School in New Delhi, offering their courses and programs. She has her own private clinic in Kolkata and is associated with Woodlands Hospital and Crystal Mines in Kolkata. And she's the founder of the Mira Center for Innovation, working on mental health, arts, and education. So she will speak now today, today's Women in India, journey from family romance to separation individuation. So, Jhuma, I give you the word.
Thank you, Gertraud, and thank you to the Indian Psychoanalytical Society for offering me this opportunity to be in this panel with Dr. Gertraud Schlesinger Kipp, pardon me, and Dr. Paula Ellman. It's my honor and pleasure to be in such an honorable panel with such wonderful colleagues who have been very supportive, inspiring all along. And I'm very thankful to the Indian Society, to Bharti, to all the members and candidates who are continuously working towards holding these kind of webinars and giving me this opportunity. And I'm thankful to all the viewers who have made out time to be here. I begin my paper. I understand I also have 30 minutes, so in case I can't finish, please pardon me. So today's women in India, journey from family romance to separation individuation, introduction. Women in India so far have been steeped in self-sacrifice as part of its cultural and familial values. Paradoxically, today's 21st century women of India are often found undergoing a barrage of guilt owing to their resistance against such filial burden and for making their proclamation of oppressed generational rights to her desires. This claim of a desire is not only about what she wants in her life, but equally about what she is ready to say no to. And to begin with that trajectory of negation, before she arrives to her claim of self-assertion, perhaps it initiates the most difficult pathway for her, that is to be able to say no to family violation, its deep-seated incest, its devaluation of the girl child vis-a-vis the boy child, and so on and so forth. The complexity of her home, her family, where her sense of love, sexuality, betrayal, servitude that left her for decades coiled in a spiral of silence is something that she carries within her into her adult trajectory, bursting open often in the clinical space. Interestingly, the sense of home for the majority of Indian women is an ambiguous notion built on a transient foundation, for she is born into a family to be bred temporarily and eventually be given away in marriage to another. A quiet message fed into the woman's psyche in her period of growing up, even till date, a direct commodity exchange between two families. So where is her home? After marriage, does she then become the active agent, the transitional object between two families, attaching homes for others to reside, to thrive, giving up her own sense of belonging? Does the woman's body become the symbolic vacillating site of that construction of others' home, a well to feed off from? In that context, is her body meant for only others' provision, their nourishment, a probable link to India's cultural transformation of bodily sexuality of the woman to a glorification of motherhood? Perhaps it is there that motherhood in India gets layered with female sexuality. Where does she look for nourishment for her own self? What happens to her bodily desires, pleasures? Is it motherhood that she looks for to seek fulfillment of that pleasure? Since direct claim to her sexuality is not always available, her own introjection of the said glorification. And once the caregiver's task is accomplished, does her utility in the family construction become redundant, as often noticed in the total familial negligence and disavowal of women in their old age? Does this add up to the rivalry between the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law in joint family situations so well known in India? The mother-in-law's entire experience of unfairness of life being discharged on the new bride of the family, the daughter-in-law, who takes over her earlier status of control and command over the family's emotional, psychic status quo, her only hegemonic phallic position that is acceptable in society and culture. All of this with an attempt to review a cultural imagination that promotes women's identity based on relational familial bondings with deliberate negation of her self-autonomy, self-agency in complementing her affinitive entity. Family secrets and the clinical space. The narratives of Indian families in the clinical space have often revealed such secrets that's splashed with filial violation. And these are mostly narrations of women of the households, as they are still the more frequent visitors to the clinic in comparison to the male members. Fables of ghastly unfairness on women affirms family enigma, where mothers have hushed up daughters when sons, cousins have made sexual advances on their sisters, saying that boys get into that phase often, but it all passes over time, not to worry, just bear a while. Perhaps for mothers, that was the only immediately available mechanism of holding together the family status quo. Wives living in marriages where husbands were in sexual relationships with the sister-in-law or quote-unquote domestic help at home, as often there is nowhere else to go as an option for the wife. Newly wedded daughter-in-laws having to withstand sexual innuendo of father-in-laws or senior male members within joint family structures. Such narratives cover a wide demography comprising urban, semi-urban, and rural spaces. The Indian woman's romantic imagination often comprises such intense, complex, violent, archaic unfoldings. Tossed within families of origin and her own marital family, the woman of India often gets lost in this to and fro motion in her life's discriminatory trajectory. Against this family chronicle comes forth the new evolving independent woman of India who is ready to speak up, opposing this very oppressive, hypocritical position of the family structure that thrives on the sacrificial silence of its women. For the independent woman, her articulation of this iniquity, this coercion, may perhaps be her first claim to her right to parity, her freedom. And her very exercise of that choice may set her path of alienation from her family and society in general. Sadly, this chain of silence may also happen to be the same common thread of identification for the women in the Indian family, the mother and the daughter, both tied up in this lapse, connecting with each other in their experience of the lack of being mothered, thereby indicating care and affection of motherly love and not necessarily biological motherhood. In other words, mothering here implying more of the feminine affective qualities, dispositions that may reside independent of any gender construct. This lack of receiving compassionate affect in the woman's psychosexual passage during her growing up may perhaps act as an absent-present thread that probably weaves the mother-daughter duo together in an ambivalent kinship. In this context, it is important to mention that this does not imply that the family per se does not cherish the symbolic gift of the feminine in its rearing practice, but all of it usually gets directed to only the male child and other autocratic members of the family. The women, if lucky, would be the recipient of its residue. Abjection and separation individuation. Most often for the Indian woman, the family acts as the pivotal point of a sacrificial entity. What is implied in the title here, Today's Women in India, Journey from Family Romance to Separation Individuation, is to emphasize the choice of the adult agency that gets exercised by today's women while asserting her psychological independence from the family, standing distinct from the overbearing, smothering family and community instructions that she may grow up with. In other words, the new Indian woman is carving out a new identity of her own, independent of preceding references of subjugation to family and community coercion, that is merged with cultural values, making it all the more difficult for the woman to identify them and choose otherwise. The emerging woman's aspiration entails an evolving ego that is free from community despotism, while engaging in the pathway of separation individuation in search of autonomy and identity, but not necessarily devoid of affective bonding. This choice indicates intense psychic changes for the woman to process, including the many phases of resilience and resistances involved in this change. However, there is a certain distinction in the separation individuation process for the woman of India. This pathway to individual identity for the Indian woman is not necessarily a struggle to grow out of the mother per se, but rather from the filial bondage and community servitude that is culturally induced, which is, as it is, a much larger phallic construct within which both the mother and the daughter feel trapped in the various performative gendered social roles. Thus, breaking away from this expected cultural norm may impose huge amount of guilt, isolation, minority treatment as the gone astray other woman for the independent woman from both within her immediate family members as well as from society at large. Something that may often be looked down upon as a negative, quote unquote, Western influence that washes away the good Indian woman's values. The price for the choice of this freedom may often entail isolation, abjection of the woman from her family and community life, leading to her solitary psychic and social journey. As a matter of fact, just before the sudden attack of the coronavirus pandemic in India, followed by the surreal state of lockdown across the country from March 2020, now being the second wave with the second phase of lockdown, the whole of India was roaring with a civil political protest movement that was primarily led by the women of India. This had a direct reference to the political situation in India prompted by the announcement of the Citizenship Amendment Act and the National Register of Citizens that indicated eradication of people who could not produce documents of authentic citizenship of India. This had a surreptitious hint of alleged annihilation of all indigenous communities and not just Muslims of India, but equally of tribe and other ethnic entities, including those others who come from Bangladesh, Pakistan, Tibet, Bhutan, and other neighboring countries at various political divisions of the land down history. This movement, the Shaheen Bagh protest from mid-December 2019, resonated in innumerable peace meetings led by women, chiefly from the Muslim community, who were later joined by women across the country from all cross-sections of society, urban, rural, other religious sectors, minority communities, members from the LGBTQ community, all demanding their right for inclusion of varied caste, tribe, religion, ethnic origin, gender, as legitimate citizens of India. When seeing through the psychoanalytic lens, one wonders at the ghastly aberration of all nuances of compassion, benevolence, the symbols of the feminine, from the construction of laws that is focused in the application of a totalitarian, brutal ideology of the overt, toxic, masculine, the phallic order of a society. I would like to imagine that perhaps the structurization of a polity is exactly where the need for a bisexual perspective may well be invited. That is, an inclusion of the feminine passive receptive, along with the masculine active penetrative tenets, with subsequent application of the same that would create a qualitative complementary exchange between the two. The Shaheen Bagh movement pronounced an inclusive statement for all genders, which was their claim to the land as their common home ground, a shared home ground of the abandoned citizens of the country, that is, whoever did not fit into the mainstream Hindu cultural ethos, the heteronormative structure, or the dogmatic religious group, all who may be clubbed under the outcast other. Fair governance provides protection to all, as its duty is to provide safety and shelter to all its subjects. But sadly enough, it is that all-encompassing symbolic parental authority itself, the state government, who were announcing them to be the outcasts, denouncing them from their ancestral right, their human right to dwell on their land, their right to authentic citizenship. The voice of protest was perhaps coming from the same voice of lament that the women experienced in their growing up with the lack of compassionate affect, the lack of the feminine touch in their female child rearing process, which later found resonance in its extension of unfair governance towards the particular despotism and negligence towards women. The state, patriarchal father, failing to project empathy in its equitable treatment of all genders, much like how perhaps the family failed the daughter of the house at an individual level, the government failed the women of the state at a larger collective level. Perhaps it is not so surprising to find this movement to be led by the same deprived community of women who have survived the spiral of silence. The individual became inclusive of the community face of the country that merged with the political claim of the country, where women have carved out their position as mass leaders of this movement. Perhaps the right to dissent in India is the new binding force reigning supreme over caste, class, and gender, and thus a larger revolution for this new India is in the rise from a united civilian consciousness. Maybe India is awaiting more such leaders from the dispossessed, abject, and oppressed populace for its future, the forsaken women of India as future leaders of the country. Secondary position in sexuality. As cited earlier in this paper, both the mother and the daughter, the women of India, seem to be bound by their shared lack of the semiotic in the pre-Oedipal stage in their growing up to be a woman from a girl child, subsequently followed by perhaps a covert longing, a surreptitious fantasy for the same semiotic. This may quietly appropriate itself as the very basis of the foundation for them to identify with each other in order to become the combined voice of resistance against patriarchy. One wonders if this longing for the semiotic may hold any potential in the woman's future to become an inherent insidious aspect in her quest to claim her sexual entity, her erotic romantic fantasy. Perhaps social claims of equanimity of women may have seemed comparatively non-threatening entities for integration in society within the larger patriarchal discourse in relation to their later claim, which was more potent than ever. And that is the sexual claim of the individual woman's right to bodily pleasures, desire, her sexual partner, redefining love and sexuality for the woman altogether. This emerging new woman claims her self-agency in making her declaration of her sexual choices. This may imply shaking grounds for traditional notions of propriety, culture, and family in India. This historical transformation in India that presently rings with the woman's claim of her bodily pleasures, her mental desires, her professional aspirations, her romantic imaginations, are inclusive of echoes from all genders comprising members of the LGBTQ community that is increasingly gaining grounds in the country. Reflecting over the resilience found in women who have undergone decades of oppression, one ponders over this enigmatic life drive that seem to have within themselves. Is it that with the onset of the internal void created by the lack of the pre-Oedipal semiotic fulfillment helped in preparing grounds for the woman's internal disposition to negotiate the various future encounters of other external losses? But does this ever get to address this deep does she ever get to address this deep emptiness in her intrapsychic well? Or would she forever be projected, enforced as a counter-reaction formation to be Goddess Durga of every Indian household, fighting the big bad phallic world with her 10 hands as the all-encompassing phallic mother of every family community? Does this constructed live goddess ever get to enjoy her nascent days being in order to process? Does the feminine in India is considered degrading? Does the woman in the Indian family ever get that opportunity of rapprochement in order to process this deep wound of barren ground within her? Or it just strives for successful oppression forever? Or does it splash out in unexpected, unwanted outbreaks of symptom formation of neurosis pathology in the clinical space is stemming from a cultural insinuation of clinical depression among women in India. By offering women, a quote from 2014, Basak, open quotes, by offering women a secondary position of sexuality through the process of denial of its primary pre-Oedipal attachment to the mother, patriarchy simultaneously offered women a culturally depressive position, which was a natural fallout of the fundamental disavowal of the woman's primary self, as would evolve by its acknowledgement of its primary attachment. This depressive position of the woman often got reinforced by family and culture, especially in the East. The negation of the fundamental core of a being, that is the self, inclusive of the body and is emitting sexuality, would naturally suffer significant emotional harm that may leave its scar on the psyche of the woman. Hence, a sociocultural driven and sanctioned depressive position got constructed for the woman, particularly in the East, unquote. This psychic intricacy of the woman may lead to an intense sense of ambivalence towards her own body and self. This affective complexity may amount to vulnerability of the ego that may feel compelled to seek a resolution by splitting the self and object representations along libidinal and aggressive poles, thereby making her sexual journey more baffled and obscure, adding to its already existing state of ambiguity and ambivalence. Subsequently, the woman may be in a constant state of conflict within herself, revolving around love and sexuality. That may result in sharp innate anxiety. One may notice this quality of ambivalence in the mother, which may further get projected into the daughter, where the mother treats her girl child as an authentication of her own bodily auxiliary, thus imposing similar ambivalence that rules within her. In that sense, the mother-daughter relationship may be internally quite precarious, founded on incertitude. Keeping this entire affective movement in mind, it is remarkable for today's women in India to wade through all such obstacles to reach their current point of psychic destination that pronounces their claim of individual desire, pleasure, leisure, work, identity, exercising choice of the autonomous self in all its colors. And having reached that, their further quest to reclaim the feminine in the mother-daughter duo, exploring generous, compassionate transactions to rebuild the relationship, is most poignant a journey. Perhaps later when I was reading Paula's paper, here I am actually prompted to think and explore the quality of thirdness that you mentioned, Paula. And here perhaps lies another aspect of the Indian cultural imagination, which is that the independent emerging woman seeks her freedom, exercises her individual agency, while at the same time strives to sustain her relational entity, something that is an essential founding of her entity, her cultural entity. A dual disposition of the autonomous self in agency, along with the relational self in engagement. I think I have very limited time now, so I'm going to skip the...
No, please take your time, Jhuma. Go on,
okay.
take your time.
Thank you so much, Gertraud. A clinical case vignette. I met Ms. P through a series of online workshops that was organized by local bodies along with UNICEF for their outreach program of community sustenance, furnishing survival strategies and community bonding among adolescents and students during the COVID pandemic, the first phase. Later, at the end of the workshops, Ms. P individually approached for therapy sessions as part of the continuing pro bono support provided by the organizations. Background of P. She was pursuing her graduation in journalism and mass communication. She came from a very humble joint family structure, the first woman in her family to pursue education till this far. It was very difficult for her to convince her father to allow her to continue with her higher education, as she had a younger brother and sister whom the father had to yet provide basic educational foundation. P had been offering private tuitions to younger students since the time she was in high school. From that earning, she gave her mother the most of it so that her mother could be independent from asking her father for money to exercise wishful spending. The leftover from that, she saved for her future prospects in education. She pursued and convinced her father that a higher degree in graduation will help her to earn more, thereby support him to run the family, share his load of educating her younger brother and sister. To this, the father finally agreed to P pursuing her higher studies. Needless to say that the active role of the father in joining hands the active role of the two providing support towards his other two children, given his earnings, had also drastically dropped during the pandemic. P was very certain that she did not want to marry, was not mentally prepared for the sudden announcement. She wanted to complete her graduation and look for a job. Also, just before the lockdown, she had met someone in her college and something got kindled between them. She liked him and wanted to take it forward. But suddenly, with the lockdown and the college closed, she could not meet him anymore. Her first love exploration got abruptly halted with no future prospects of renewing it. Exchange over phone was not possible as there was only one phone amongst the three brothers and sisters. The conflict over marriage with her parents caused a deep sense of dejection in her. The onset of a financial crisis within the family immediately made her the obvious object to be abjected from her family net, that which she was wanting to build along with her father. In the process, she was required to relinquish her own desire of building her future with her newly found love, which was residing in her silent thoughts and fantasy, and would probably seek burial in the same silence. She was also required to abandon her years-long aspiration to seek an economically independent woman's free career life, gaining social recognition and dignity. Therapeutic intervention. However, her deepest sense of betrayal came from her mother's inability to voice for what was fair for her daughter, who had always understood her mother's silent struggles, oppression, and wishes, and stood by her. While she felt acute anger against her father, she felt psychically abandoned by her mother. She suddenly felt all alone in her life struggle. She came to seek therapy due to her profound sense of sorrow that she had lost her mother and thus was left with no strength whatsoever to continue her fight against the world. Feeling forsaken in her pre-Oedipal diet with her primary love object, the confidence to confront the phallic encounter with the larger society, represented here by the father, left her shaken at the core of her entity. Also to note that this is the same time when she had also to give up her first romantic diet. With the limited number of sessions, only 6 sessions, the therapeutic effort was only to help her to find an initial emotional holding, assisting in her affective catharsis to begin with. Following which, there was an attempt to reinstate her mother's position in her wounded psychic space, drawing her attention to the mother's realistic limitations and bindings for not being able to exercise her fair opinion, and that it was not a deliberate action to inflict pain on her daughter. It was perhaps more the mother's incapacity rather than a choice of negation towards the daughter. That way, the process of restoring the internal identification of the mother with the internal identification of the daughter with the mother may help her regain that lost emotional sustenance to commence negotiation with her father and the world at large yet again, at least for the time being. Sexual split in women, the object of eros and the erotic object. Desire and pleasure may not necessarily come in a direct manner for the Indian woman who dwells in inherent conflict, confounded with cultural morals. A common cultural and communal identification through self-sacrifice leading to moral masochism may often be the only glorious identity and road for attainment of socially approved status of worth for the woman. Thus, marriage and motherhood in India may often hold promises of such socially clandestine pleasures for the woman through her attainment of glory and power, which equally carries contradictory fears of bondage and oppression for the woman. The process of patriarchy may be found hidden in women's corroboration in such validation of women's ultimate worth in oppressive marriages and glorified motherhood in their imagination. Perhaps this may be a more elementary choice for the woman than the long, tedious negotiation with the phallic patriarchal world of masculinity, since she's not prepared with that self-agency, self-autonomy to carve out her independent existence, as stated earlier, which is not necessarily devoid of object relational entity altogether. The exaltation of motherhood in the Indian society and the strong distinction of women divided between sexual object and love object for men's sexual choices all adds to the complexity of the woman's position of Indian society, who gets torn between a Devi goddess and a woman of flesh and blood. Consequently, any assertion or claim of their sexuality, which is pleasure-driven and not utility-driven, like motherhood and reproduction, may bring about a deep sense of an undue amount of guilt in the woman. The burden of this guilt may leave the woman with an intense feeling of ambivalence towards her own body and sexuality, having lived years in a cultural negation of her body, all adding to its already existing oscillation. As mentioned above, this ambivalence in turn may often get projected into other women. For example, the very popular reference of jealousy between mother-in-law and daughters-in-law in regional television serials is very common in India. Subsequently, this negation of the body may indirectly encourage women into reinforced masochistic position, transitional psychic erotic dynamism as their only form of sanctioned glory or pleasure by family and society, which is free of guilt. A glorious form of pleasure which is not possible to attain directly, but to be sought indirectly through a self-sacrificial mechanism. The structure of motherhood offers such a sanctified, confirmed stature as an option that is culturally familiar and readily available for the women of India. In 1934, Helen Deutsch contended that masochism was rooted in the psychobiological experiences of women's menses defloration, childbirth, and childcare. Added to that, sociocultural expectations and familial sacrificial norms re-emphasize the depressive position of the women in society, making it all the more difficult for the woman to break free of the cycle of masochism. While in 1937, Horney expressed that human masochism found deeper satisfaction by losing the self in something greater, by dissolving the individual in its self-sacrificial offerings to life and civilization. The quality of self-sacrifice in women in Indian families, inclusive of complete cleansing of sexual pleasure or any desire whatsoever, tends to become a cultural icon for cultural altruism for the woman. The quality of altruism falls prey to such familial societal compulsions to become pathological, quote unquote, in its onset of its parasitic goal, which is solely invested on the woman of the family. All desires of any self-satisfactions are encouraged to be suppressed by family, society, culture, the outburst of which in the clinical setup may often bring about acute guilt and shame, self-loathe within the individual, subsequently rendering the self further unacceptable, which altogether may often shake grounds, leading to nervous breakdown for the woman. In such situations, delicate areas of cognitive dissonances may even strike very strong. Hence, analytic interventions need to be very patient in its prognostic speculations, while with limited psychodynamic psychotherapeutic engagement, it may often be challenging to even find suitable opportunity for such intervention or interpretation of the same. Women and bisexuality. Taking forward Chodoro's contention quoted in 2021 in Press by Basak. Chodoro writes, Chodoro, sorry, in 1989, argued that during the pre-Oedipal phase, due to the mother's deeper maternal identification with the male child, aroused by the strong physical identification than with the male child, deeper maternal identification with the female child than with the male child, the process of separation and individuation are made more difficult for girls and may subsequently lead to incomplete self-other distinction within the girl child. This feeling of enthrallment by the daughter towards the mother may further hinder the capacity for the girl child to internalize the diet that calls for a certain symbolic capacity for abstract mentalization, which may further create obstacles in her passage to her free and prospective creative trajectory in life, unquote. In view of the case of Ms. P cited earlier in this paper, one may now be able to identify the root of P's feeling desolated while her mother ceased to continue with their psychological umbilical cord holding them together. She seemed to be internally abjected by the mother and thus found it so hard to find her inner strength to continue maneuvering with the external phallic patriarchal world. Thus, the immediate therapeutic goal in that limited period was to be able to reinstate that foundational pre-Oedipal semiotic position so that she could reside with Ellman in that dual dynamic psychic environment, staying pivoted in that semiotic location. Given the fact that the woman most often grows up in a familial environment with the lack of the semiotic dyad, her larger quest in adult life may often continue to be a reinstatement of that lack. In the Indian context, in particular, a possible negotiating element for the woman regarding this conflict between the pre-Oedipal semiotic dyad, eros, and the Oedipal semantic triad, erotic, is often played by maintaining a split between the two. She attempts to derive satisfaction of the two distinct qualities by often developing different attachments with two different objects, namely the emotional attachment eros with the woman, the sexual attachment erotic with the man. The first form of attachment being based on identification with the maternal, while the latter being based on differences with the phallus. And in this sense, the woman's engagement with bisexuality stands more pronounced, perhaps, in her sexual trajectory than her counterpart in society. Conclusion, but perhaps the hope for today's India lies in the fact that the youth of the country are all joining forces to question orthodox constructs of family and society, redefining positions of female autonomous agencies in society. Along with it is being carved out the reformulation of the feminine as an independent quality from its gendered usage only applicable for women. Over time, perhaps, psychoanalysis in the clinic will also find its new and dynamic site of operation and redefinition, freeing itself from its exclusive entity within four confining walls of the quote-unquote clinical pathological. Human bonding and relationships will seek different filial grounds to begin with. For all one knows, the redefined familial grounds with non-biological bondings, tightening relationships other than the romantic, erotic ones, there itself may begin a different intimate imagination for the woman to cite for the future. This may be distinct from the initial family romance that she had left behind in the past, which will break the spiral of silence and open up the realm of articulation around the feminine within different genders. And I conclude with that. I thank the panel, Dr. Schlesinger Kipp, for giving me extra time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jhuma and Paula, for your papers. I was asked to comment, but I will not comment these two so rich papers, just really show you something. So to loosen up a little bit and to introduce in the discussion. I looked for a piece of art to show something the two papers explained to us. And in this search, maybe because of the pandemic, I went far back to the 16th century. Can you see this? Okay. This is a draft of Leonardo da Vinci in the 16th century. For the later, it's a draft for the later famous painting called Anna Selbsttritt. This means Anna, the mother, grandmother, Mary, the daughter, and the children, Jesus and his cousin. The two faces from grandmother and mother are on the same level. Afterwards, the mother is high up and the daughter is below, but in this draft, they are on the same level. And the bodies are melting into each other, so showing the unseparatedness of mother and daughter. The loving gaze is also a little unheimlich, uncanny, the gaze of the grandmother, Anna. And she's totally concentrated to her daughter, Maria. This gaze could be seen as possessive or ultimate love. The neediness to have a loving mother present, to become herself a loving mother for her child, at the same time, the problem of separation from her own mother is beautifully drawn in this draft. In the later painting, mother and daughter are more separated, and the vulnerability of the young woman in his bare neck, where the mother's loving and not more so uncanny gaze is resting. The bodies are no more melting, allow the young woman to separate a little, although she's still sitting on the lap of her mother. I thought this painting is, on the one hand, maybe...
Can you show us the second painting? We can't see it right now.
Okay, I don't have the second painting. I showed you the third painting because I thought it's too much. I just can mention that I think it's the details from the papers of Paula and Ellman showing so beautifully how difficult it is in all cultures and centuries to separate from the mother, how much we women need a loving mother, and how difficult it can be to fall out of the family context or the culture and societal context, as Jhuma showed. And this does not allow the young woman to find her own way, her self-agency. This is how Paula called it. I cannot translate it in German, by the way. This word self-agency is not to be translated. I don't know how it's in your language in India, if you can translate it. So the second is just very short, from Sophonisba Anguissola. These are three sisters playing chess. It's also from the 16th century. And I thought it's from the same period as Leonardo da Vinci, and she is the first known female painter of the Renaissance. I feel that it shows the self-agency of the three sisters being before the adolescence, of course, still girls, having fun in thinking. Chess is a very difficult play where you have to be extremely good in planning, in thinking, in self-agency to win. Again, there is no masculine figure, but the mother, who seems to be interested, but also controlling and watching. Women struggle in different forms in their self-agency throughout the times and all over the world. So with this short comment, I will open the discussion. Wie kriege ich das jetzt wieder weg? Okay, so I can open the discussion. I have some chats from different members, but I can say that you go to the point of reactions and raising your hands if you want to say something. Vati, you can help me, maybe?
Anybody who wants to have a comment, share a comment, or wants to ask anything, just raise your hand So you can raise your hand by going to your screen. Just below your screen, there is a reaction button. So once you press the reaction button, there are different modes and you can just raise your hand. And then me or Gertraud will come and will ask you to just whatever question or comment you have. So who would like to go first?
Maybe Sayantani, who wrote a lot of chats. Maybe you could
It's Anthony just thanked both Paula and Jhuma. Probably it's Subhranshu who was asking quite a few questions. Yeah. So Subhranshu, would you like to ask it yourself?
No, she's not there.
Are you there? Yeah, he's raised hand. Yeah, Subhranshu, you can go and you can ask your question.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, I must say that I enjoyed both the papers and both of them were very much thought-provoking and evocative. That is why I came up with so many questions.
Okay.
So I asked too many questions to Dr. Paula Ellman. Okay, let me ask the most important question that I am curious to learn. Whether this the trajectory of development of internal sense of self-agency is similar in a female child and male child. And the second part is, are there certain components of sense of self-agency that are being contributed by the mother figure, the attitude and personality or the presence of the mother of the child, and there are certain other components that are being contributed by the father function that you mentioned in your paper? And another small question, that is, what happens to children who are being raised by single parent, especially in a dyadic nuclear family in an urban setting?
Yes, thank you so much, Paula. Do you want to answer immediately?
Certainly. Could you repeat the first question?
Hello. My first question is there a difference between a female child and a male child in the trajectory of developing a sense of self-agency?
Okay. Yeah, that's what I wanted to get back to. You know, I think the question about is there a difference between a female child and a male child is what ties together your paper, Jhuma, with my paper. And that I think that Jhuma, you speak so eloquently to facets of the sociocultural that come into the family and are carried in the family through the mother and father. And so the different pressures, the different sociocultural pressures, I think, are what create the differences for the trajectories of the female and the male, the child, the boy and the girl. So I think these factors are crucial depending upon where we are situated as to what identifications are carried by the mother and father. And that's what makes for the different trajectories of the little boy and the little girl. The question about the single parent, you know, I think the mother and the father, I think we can become seduced into focusing on the concrete mother and father. Whereas I think it helps us in our thinking to think about the function of the mother and father, because the single parent, there may be other people involved in the upbringing of a child that functions in the father capacity, the third. So I think it's important for us to keep our minds open to the function of the mother and father, the function of the maternal place. The function of a father is creating the opportunity for the third. So I think that the challenges with a single parent would therefore not, there would be specific challenges, but it would be where are the functions in the maternal being expressed in the development of the child? Where are the functions of the paternal being expressed? So that's where I'd like to stop. And I'd invite Jhuma to speak more to that, or to hear other people from the audience share their reactions to these helpful comments.
Jhuma, you want
Thank you,
to?
madam.
And thank you for posing those comments.
No.
They're helpful for us to be clarifying our ideas together about this.
I'm fine. I think it'll be nice to hear people from the audience share their thoughts and respond to both the papers. But I completely agree with what Paula just said. There may be functional challenges in single parenting, but I guess the qualities of masculinity, femininity, its internalization within the caregiving person, it is independent of a gender construct. And I think that's what makes it, I think, possible, probably, and I think also hopeful that other than the functional challenges, it shouldn't be, I don't know, it shouldn't be, what is the word, blasphemous. And also, I suppose, as Paula said, is it's more the rearing process which brings about the elements of the self being different for the boy child or the girl child. So I think it's nice to leave it open for others to share their thoughts.
Maybe to say something to this question of single parent. I think that if the father is not there or the mother is not there, the important thing is the inner picture, the inner feeling from the mother of her own father, if the father is not there. So how the father of the mother is represented in herself, and the other way around, how the mother of the fathering father, the only father, is represented in the father. So this goes like in the picture from the parents to the young mother or father, and it's an internal, you have to have an, what I say in supervisions very often, that if the young candidate knows his own inner object of mother and father, it's very important for analysis if the patient has a very difficult inner object. So it's depending on your own inner object of your father or mother. And so the cultural tradition is, of course, then very difficult, as Jhuma said, but if you happen to have good inner objects, or you healed your objects, like in Jhuma's case with the patient, then you can deal with these patients. So maybe this is what I thought about this question. But now we have Harriet Wolf. Thank you for being with us and for staying with us.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. And I thought both papers were extremely interesting. And related to your comment just now, Gertraud, we speak so often of inner object. At the same time, you've shown us that there is no one inner object. There is a variety, generations, transgenerational transmission of many objects. And the extent to which they are similar or integrated or respectful makes a big difference in terms of the fabric of one's inner life. But what I wanted to say was about how much I appreciated the differentiation of capacities and functions. Paula mentioned Gilligan. So Gilligan and Snyder, Snyder is a graduate student with Gilligan, studied small boys and small girls and found that feminine qualities, feminine, I would call it feminine capacities perhaps, for example, intuitive knowing and emotional connectedness are the same in small boys and small girls. Boys, at least in Western culture, when they go to school, say age 5, 6, begin to become what Snyder called real boys, less feminine in their adaptation. And that's like a sociocultural influence that's exaggerated by the school environment and the peer group. And then girls lose their voice later in adolescence, as Paula was pointing out. But those basic capacities are there. And I think it's really helpful for us to keep in mind that the feminine is not gender-based. It's a set of wonderful capacities that both men and women have. And I think, as you were all pointing out, the sociocultural context has a lot to do with the, the sort of main trajectory. Anyway, I just thank you very much for these thought-provoking papers, as the gentleman said.
Thank you, Harriet, for your comment and your appreciation. Thank you very much.
Well, probably Timothy has written in the chat. Timothy, would you like to ask your question? Would you like to say it yourself?
Yes. Who was it?
Yes, it was me.
Yeah.
Again,
yeah.
Too many men talking, I think. But I think my question has just been answered actually by Gertrude. I was just commenting on this idea of the first contact that the baby girl has of the father is the father and the mother, which I think you were talking about. And then I had a sort of more sort of whimsical idea about is there a possibility that there's a modern Indian man who is a potential confederate to resisting cultural norms.
Thank you very much. This is a question to Jhuma. Is there a modern Indian man inside to change the self-agency for women and men? Not only a more modern Indian woman?
Yes, absolutely, Timothy. There are modern Indian men, the younger generation, who are redefining masculinity. I think this is where also, when we are talking about gendered position, this is also a growing need that we are realizing, that masculinity also needs to be talked about. Men are trapped within certain notions of masculinity, and this freedom of the feminine within the male self, it's so welcoming for a whole lot of the new men of India, and we hope we have more of that. But it's difficult when there is a very overt cultural and political denigration of the feminine, and which is also very structurally, psychically, even the cultural insinuations are very structured to bombard the psyche, and I think it's equally hard for such men to free themselves of such masculinities. I think it'll be really nice if men talk a lot more about their feminine capacities, and that will open up the entire discourse of gender sexuality.
Is there someone?
Yes, Sudhanshu, what do you do?
Sumanju
Yes.
Aditya?
Yeah.
Yeah.
May I ask one question to Dr. Jhuma Basak?
Sure.
Because her paper was also very stimulating and thought-provoking for me. Actually, my question is linked with a paper of Dr. Paula Ellman. Dr. Paula Ellman mentioned two concepts which are new to me, as mother function and father function, determining the development of a sense of self-agency. Now, if the mother figures, they behave in a very masculine manner, they take up masculine roles, then what happens to this mother function and father functions to the psyche of the male and female child while developing this sense of self-agency? Are they get more enriched or they get more confused? Is there a constructive interference or a destructive interference?
Paula? Who is Paula?
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay. Do you want to answer?
Yeah, I actually think the question was addressed to Jhuma, but I think, I think what you're talking about are I think what you're addressing are some of the very, and maybe the United States, I don't think it's just the United States that's taking the lead with this, but there are such current trends happening now that are challenging our traditional ideas of gender development. And I think about what it means to be masculine, about what it means to be a woman, about questions about binary sexuality and can sexuality become more fluid. And I think the younger generation is leading us to be challenged with our traditional ideas of gender. And I don't think it's destructive. I think it's a challenge for us to have traditional gender concepts be challenged, because there are many people, and I think even in the older generation, it just went under wraps, that many people now are being willing to consider that binary genders aren't the only answer to the development of identifications. And I don't think that's destructive. I think it opens up choices. And I think the whole paradigm of agency is that there is choice that we make in terms of who we are and who we believe we are and who we want to be. And I think this is very important and very challenging for many of us to consider that that gender can be fluid and not just in binary terms.
Thank you. Jhuma, you want to say something to this question?
Right.
Of the masculine mother?
Almost echoing what Paula just said, I surely don't think it's destructive. It is definitely a transitional phase that we are witnessing across the world, particularly in India, that gender sexuality is going through many challenges, as Paula was saying. Gendered roles are going through much challenges, and any transition would have shaky grounds. So I think one understands that one feels apprehensive about it. But to put it very simply, to what Shubhranshu was asking, there was a time when the very typical Indian woman, visually, if I may say, quote unquote, long hair with a bun, wearing a sari, wearing a bindi, mother of two, was not seen to be driving a car. Today it's a very regular visual that we see, that she is driving a car, and that doesn't necessarily make her masculine. So I think over time, our understanding of functions will also perhaps not be within these binaries. Hence, what we are perceiving through functional activities as masculine and feminine may not necessarily be so. Emotional intrapsychic capacities of femininities and masculinities call for deeper introspection rather than functional activities of playing roles. So almost what Paula said, it is surely not destructive.
Yeah. So we have so many young women in the audience, and we want to hear their voice. Do you have questions or remarks or your own ideas? I would be very happy. Buddy Jane?
Yeah. Well, Gertrude, I thought let me have my space also to speak up. So I was just hearing to all the comments, and of course, such rich and interesting papers. And one of the things that I was wondering, and I think probably we are confusing between the biological gender and the masculine feminine aspect that every one of us, have within us. So, and this is a confusion. And to deal with this confusion, probably we can also look into the masculine and feminine as aspects of inclusivity and exclusivity. What I feel is, inclusiveness is more of a feminine trait, and exclusivity is more of a masculine trait. Now, I'm not saying men and women, but masculine and feminine. And even in families or in person, wherever we see a more of a feminine trait, whether it's a male or a female, that person finds things or is interested in things which are more inclusive, whether it's in the rearing practice, whether it's in the children, whether it's family in general, or any social, political environment, whatever it is. So that helps the person, that helps the child, that helps the environment. More exclusivity is, of course, as we know, is more of a sign of insecurity, the paranoia, the schizoid aspect, and that is, of course, that kind of hampers all these things. The person, it makes the person insecure, it makes the rearing practices, brings disruption in that. But of course, that is also needed. So probably it's a balance of both, just like we need a balance of both masculine qualities and feminine qualities. But that is an ideal and it never happens. So that is what I just wanted to say aloud. And yeah, just one more thing, which just came from another webinar that I was just also talking about the same thing. Probably we are coming a full circle. So earlier, at least in India, and probably if I go into the Victorian age, probably in the far west also, when we had more of joint families, this inclusivity was more there. Even the feminine aspect of men was more included in the family. It was okay. But now the more we are getting into nuclear family, and from there to the single parenthood, it is becoming more rigid structure. The femininity in men is not accepted, and so is for women to be not simply as an inclusive trait, and that is somewhere alarming. If we can simply include and accept, that would be probably more desirable. That's what I just want to say.
Yes, we have Gundan Hemka.
Hi.
Hi.
I don't have a question. I just have a comment.
Mhm.
I think this is for both the speakers. The ideas of agency, choice, fluidity, in a sense of inclusiveness, even an inner psychic fight that both of the speakers elucidated in their papers. I think it is something which, to me as a woman and as a very young practitioner in psychoanalysis, I think it touched home. It was something that I really resonated with. And it is something that I've seen in the work that I also do with a lot of homeless women with psychosocial disabilities. So I just want to say that thank you. I think it was very important for us to voice some of these things, especially in this pandemic world. And I just want to say it was a really great experience. So thank you to both the speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kemka, and also for your work, which you shared with us in the COVAP newsletter, so everyone can read about your work with the homeless women, which is very interesting. And I hope you can go on. At the moment, it will not be possible, but soon, hopefully.
Thank you, Gunjan. It was lovely to hear you and lovely to read about your work. Thank you.
So then if nobody has a question, I have...
Probably, Patricia wanted to say something. She just raised hand and...
Okay, I didn't see it, sorry. Patricia.
Then it was gone.
Yeah,
yeah, Patricia,
Yes.
Would you like to say something? Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you. First of all, I will thank Jhuma and Paula for your papers, rich papers. And I was thinking about the difference between mother and father functions, especially from Jhuma's paper, and the similarity in that are in Latin America. Now, how the family roles have a determinant place and related to the historical tradition of sacrificial place of women. No? And so I think that it's very important to go deeper on this idea of the sacrificial aspect of women in maternity, and their historical and cultural sediment, and I was thinking in how they relate to independent women that you have been developed and how carry out their ideas, how new generations are on this path, because I think that it is a movement in all around the world, in this way, about the difference between maternity as an ideal that can't move it, and the sacrificial functions of motherhood, and a new position. And on the other hand, the most, difficult issue, which is the violence against women and women as an object. In Latin America is very similar, the violence and the rapes and the women that are died in this gender-based issues, and so that I would like to comment.
Thank you, Patricia, for making this wide connection between South America and India, and of course in between Europe and North America too. But this is what is very important in the two papers, that maybe Jhuma could say something and showed it very beautifully how the social cultural environment is changing or is worsening for women in India, maybe also in our countries, and maybe also in South America, but it's not improving. But at the moment, you describe the patriarchal system, which is in India and in many other countries, and I could also say the non-democratic rules and governments in many countries. We can not progress with our COVAP meetings in some countries where we had been before some years. We cannot go there anymore without giving a danger for the women who are there. So this is, for me, also a very sad development. So Jhuma, maybe you can tell us on something more about the actual situation in India, what you described, or only if you want.
I think most of my Indian colleagues and over here, they experience it themselves. I would agree with you, Gertrude, that the situation is probably worse and more scary, maybe because of a very deliberate right-wing political intervention which is happening across the world, where cultural norms are taken up as driving entities for women. So notion of Indian women that we've grown up with, which has been so many times redefined in the entire feminist movement in India and across the world, is being thwarted all of a sudden. Their notions of freedom, their notions of identity is thwarted as a very deliberate political, cultural drive by the government. And I think that is becoming a little scary for all of us. We also see the kind of violence which has gone up, state violence, rapes, very gruesome rapes, in brutal ways of mutilating the woman's body. I think all of that, where I was trying to mention the caring element, as we would say, the feminine capacity of the state is somewhere failing to take care, protect its women. And I think that is very alarming. One feels abandoned and lost, orphaned because of that, because the state does have the capacity to express both the masculine and feminine capacities, and it needs to exercise in that capacity. But unfortunately, the affective disposition is completely washed off in absolute deliberation.
Oh yeah, it's scaring us. I have a comment from Debjani Datta in the chat. Do you want to speak out? No. She just commented that bringing up a male child or a girl child, both their feminine and masculine sides should be encouraged. So she's right. When there's one hand from Subranju.
Yes, but actually this is in reaction to what Dr. Jhuma Basak just said now. My curious question is, if the apex person of the state, say Prime Minister or President, is a female person, happens to be a female individual, is it so that then the state can express more the female function, the mother function more, compared to when the apex state leader or the apex administrative functionary happens to be a male person? Does it happen? What is our experience in our state?
Jhuma, what do you think?
Thank you, Shubhranshu, for bringing this up. And I will refrain from getting into talking about what is the situation in our state, because I am not moving into a political discourse. Perhaps this is not the platform for that. But in a much larger concern to what you're saying, it is not necessarily that if we have a leader who is a woman, that we will have more feminine capacities and practices. I am sure we have seen great leadership and feminine capacities in previous male leaders of India. Without going into a political debate over Gandhi, but Gandhi does stand as a wonderful example for not just the father of the country, but in various aspects. If we look at the non-cooperation movement, or the non-violent movement that he was talking about against the then colonial period, was it, I think, something that I would like to look at, a feminine capacity. So that's what I would like to respond.
Thank you, Jhuma. When no one has a question, I had one more theoretical question to Paula, because the penis as link in the triangular space was new to me. I always thought it's the phallus. And so this is more bisexual, the phallus, than the penis. Could you explain the difference? Maybe in short words. You are not, you muted.
It was Dana Berkstead-Breen that brought in that concept, but I think the concept isn't new. I think others have written about the third. The idea of, and I think the way she talked about the phallus is that, and she differentiate the phallus from the penis's link, is that the phallus can be more two-dimensional, kind of a narcissistic, omnipotent position, rather than a function of the phallus as linking and as providing an opportunity for mental space, as providing the third. And I guess, yes, many authors have written about the third. And I think that's where the concept of penis as link comes in, that it's the idea of creating a sense of a third and not just as a dyadic, omnipotent position.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that can make it more clear.
Jhuma? Ah, Harriet. Okay, Harriet. Could you unmute yourself, please? You are muted.
There, thank you.
Yeah,
it wouldn't
okay.
unmute. Thank you.
No.
Your question, Gertraud, brings me back to wanting to ask the two speakers about anatomy. The old feeling was anatomy was destiny. And, I was thinking of a 4-year-old I've had reason to be consulted about, who has male genitalia, but in every other way is a feminine person, and was brought to treatment in anticipation of having to go to school, where she would not be experienced comfortably by peers. So internally, she and in behavior and in observable, in every observable way except genitalia, this was a small girl. So I wonder about psychoanalytic theory. When we talk about penis as link, we're still embedded in anatomy. I think we don't know what to do about anatomy. And I wonder if Jhuma and Paula could say something more related to that tension.
Thank you. That was my question too. Yeah. Jhuma, do you have an idea?
I think I would like to voice my ambiguity, confusion. I would agree with Harriet that we do kind of challenges, and some of my other working colleagues, not analytic, but in other spheres where I have had the opportunity to listen to their sharings of, as you said, in this situation, Harriet, it's a young person, a child who has male genitals, but in every other capacity, visibly, is like a girl. And I've had experiences of listening to such sharings. I think I don't have the answer, but the body gives us a concrete externalization of an abstract concept of self, masculinity, femininity, all the words, all the phonetics that we say. And a young person who is growing up with this kind of a vastness in consciousness, it is a huge challenge for us to be able to understand. Not prepared, but it is forcing us to relook. And I think probably I will look cues coming from this little child to be able to understand how to negotiate with this this body that is so so tactile and which is so concrete, while at the same time my notions, my abstractions are complementarily so intense, almost are in dialogue, constant dialogue, and so intense. Possibly I haven't had that intellectual or psychosexual consciousness. And the child is prompting me to actually think along that and see where it takes me. And at the moment, I feel very honestly, because I don't have absolute answers, but I definitely to traverse this journey. I don't know if any of this had any sense.
I really appreciate your words, vastness in consciousness. It's such a challenge, as also Paula was saying, to our ability to think about these matters.
I appreciate your comment, Jhuma, because I think the body, the body is so concrete in its parts, and yet even the concepts of phallus or penis as link, it's like we're trying to reference the body parts and take on an abstract concept from it that can have meaning in our conceptualizing development. And I think we are challenged with trying to move beyond the concrete. I mean, Harriet, you're working with, you're consulting about a little girl.
Exactly.
Not a little boy.
Yeah.
But I think also in this children, we have to be very broad in thinking, because they are phases, as we know, where boys want to be girls and girls want to be boys, and afterwards it's changing. And so I think it's a very difficult discussion in our countries, at least, at least in, who is it, in the United Kingdom, with the transsexual children or trans children with trans identity. It's a very, very difficult discussion because the children are in development and they have different phases. And if we say too early, this is a girl, or, although it's a boy from his bodily experience, yeah, I think it's very difficult. At least I know a boy aged 5 who is very sportive and like a boy, and on the other hand has long hairs and likes to wear skirts. And when his father was trying to carry something very heavy, I asked, "Can I help you?" The father, and the young boy said, "Oh, I know it's sexist, but men are stronger." So, I mean, it was 5 years he said this. So I think we have to be open. Is he a strong boy, or does he want to have long hairs and skirts, and just let him do it and see what happens when he's grown up.
May I say something? I'm just thinking aloud, actually, prompted by Harriet, what you said. I would like to ask myself if we are in an evolutionary process, as body, culture, community has evolutionary processes. Are we also talking about an evolutionary process of ego structures? And if that is so, is this child prompting me to think? I may be completely wrong and off the track, but I'm just accommodating the thought. Is this child compelling me to think that the ego structure formation in process is already so mature that it's challenging a tactile bodily structure, and it's demanding maybe an abstract comprehension, abstract integration within the body.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Just thought aloud. I'm not sure.
Super, Anju.
In this context, my question is, if this is a sign of maturation of ego, then why there will be distress, which are often termed as gender dysphoria? There should not be distress. There should be a very relaxed state of mind if it is a sign of more mature ego state.
Yes, that's what I wanted to say. I think that you have to be open in mind and vastness in consciousness to the children, but also to the grown-ups who in one seminar about transsexuality, one female candidate said, "It's the first time I'm asking myself why I feel female. Why do I feel female?" She was really very irritated because the first time we saw a film about a young girl who wants to be a boy, and she said, "I don't know why I feel female, but I feel female." So this, I think, this is a very good question for young and also for older women and men. Why do I feel I'm a man? I don't know. The same question, maybe not so often asked.
Maybe looking at developmental processes, maybe we are being challenged with the conventional understanding of developmental processes. We may have to relook at them.
Yes.
cognitive structures, ego structures. Not always do they go hand in hand. And maybe the way we have known in a chronological manner, maybe we have to relook. I'm not sure.
Mhm. Yeah, maybe Paula and Jhuma in the end, because we are coming to the end and I don't see any more questions. One question, Andreas. Hallo. You have to, du musst dich laut schalten, Andreas.
So,
yeah.
So I just want to thank you that I was invited to join this very wonderful and interesting meeting. And I have if the video could be met, I would like to thank you.
Ein bisschen höher.
With my adoration of, can you put me on the big face?
Nee, das geht nicht, das musst du einfach ein bisschen höher halten.
Ja.
So, ja.
Yes.
It's lovely. Thank you.
Ich kann doch. Ja, okay.
That's really nice.
Yeah,
we would like to have it.
Yeah.
Please mail it to us.
You can mail it to Badi Jen and we can see it now.
I will do.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
So that's my thanks for all your group and wonderful work I also did with you also in Calcutta.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andreas. Thank you. Thank you, Andreas. We would like to have this lovely painting. Yeah, Jhuma and Paula, you want to say some closing words, because then we can come to our end for today only.
I just greatly appreciated this opportunity, and I think the Centenary of the Indian Society is affording very rich opportunities for us to connect internationally. So thank you so much, Bharti Jen, for organizing this, and thank you so much, Gertraud, for moderating this so beautifully and bringing in very evocative artwork for us to enjoy and think about. And thank you so much, Jhuma, for your very rich contribution that I think opens our minds in wonderful ways. So it's been a pleasure. And thank you, Harriet, for joining us.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
And Patricia also.
Yes, Patricia had to leave. So Jhuma,
yes,
you want to say?
I would like to offer my heartfelt thanks and gratitude to the Indian Society, to Bharti, to organizing this, and to the president of the Indian Society, Dr. Pushpa Mishra. I would like to thank all the participants, some of the candidates that I can see here. I would really thank Paula and Gertrude for being such wonderful colleagues for the last couple of years. We connected, working together has been such a delight. So much that I'm learning about psychoanalysis, about organization. I think also the sense of belonging is just so wonderful. Lovely to see Andreas after Calcutta. Thank you, Harriet, for making time and being here and inspiring us. I think I look forward to this wonderful connect that the pandemic has created. The entire isolation has been wiped off with this digital connect. And it's so lovely to experience the psychoanalytic community at this level, which we never had before. So I think all things have their own ways of giving. And I would like to see the pandemic as something so significantly that we've got. Once again, I thank the Indian Society, I thank Bharti for the initiative, and every other member and candidate from the society who are organizing these. Thank you, Gertraud, for being such a wonderful colleague and for being such a wonderful chair. Thank you. That's it. Lovely.
Thank you also from my part. Also, all my greetings. I did not see Pushpa to her. I heard she's in the climate committee now, which is also very important for women, for refugees, for everything, for the world. And so send my greetings also to her, please, and to the Indian Psychoanalytic Society. And I'm always thinking, when I was at the House of Your Society from Bose, I mean, this was such a great pleasure to be there. I hope this is still a good place to meet for you, or it will be when the pandemic is over, that this is still there for you. And all my congratulations for the 100th anniversary of the Indian Psychoanalytic Society. It's really long ago, and still there. So thank you very much. We hope in the future we can see as now, we can connect as we do now, but we also could see in vivo sometimes. So to have the central, the feeling to be together in one room is even very different than on the screen. But you are right, Jhuma, I could see the candidates I saw in Calcutta and the other people in Australia and in Finland and in North and South America. So it's very, very exciting. So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward maybe to see some of you at the IPA videos, at the IPA conference. Yes, we have to have some mind input in our mind, because otherwise the pandemic is, we don't have anything in our mind if we don't connect and speak together. At least it's a danger. Okay, thank you very much. Bharti, you want to say something?
Just thanks.
At the end?
A very heartfelt thanks to you, Gertrude, for so beautifully moderating the whole session, and to Paula and Jhuma for such a rich and illuminating contribution. Thank you so very much. Hopefully we can have it again. Thanks to Harriet for making it at such an early morning. I know it must be a very early hour. Thanks to, thanks to Patricia, thanks to Timothy, thanks to Adriana, thanks to all the viewers who are here, thanks to all our members from Kolkata, Mumbai and Delhi. Thanks to our colleagues who are putting creative input and handling the digital platform. Thank you, all of you. And I thank all of you from behalf of our president, Dr. Pushpa Mishra, because she's not well. She had had to go through this COVID thing, though now she is negative, but still at her age and with her, her recovery is quite slow. So she couldn't be here. And she is not in the very best of the health. So yeah. But I thank you.
I'm so sorry. And say all the greetings
yes,
to her, and that we all wish that she will be better soon.
Yes. And thanks to all of you. This webinar couldn't be a success without all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Goodbye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.